Welcome back. For the fourth of our panels this morning, I should say, or is it just afternoon? Is it 12 o'clock yet? Yes, it is. Yes. Good afternoon and welcome back to the fourth of our and final panel that we have today at the IOM conference. I'm glad some of you took the instruction very seriously and stayed in the room. And those colleagues of ours who have popped out, I'm sure will be coming back in steadily. In the desire to make sure that we stick to the schedule, I'm going to introduce the next panel and our next moderator, and allow time for our colleagues also to filter back into the room. Now, this next panel is perhaps a culmination of everything we've been discussing so far. It's this idea of what does partnership look like? How do we interact? What courtesy and what distinctions must we make when we're interacting with different stakeholders? So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce this next panel, Bridging the Gap, Transformational Partnerships with the Private Sector for Climate Change. Our moderator is Ugochi Daniels, and Ugochi is the Deputy Director General of Operations at the IOM. Ugochi is a senior executive with over 27 years of diverse managerial experience with donors and the United Nations, other entities and academia, as well as the private sector institutions. Daniels was named a hero of the United Nations for championing women's health needs in humanitarian emergencies. Heroes defend the vulnerable and fight for human rights, and they expect cooperation and peace and talk to the world's most vulnerable, facing the world's biggest challenges. So for the next 90 or so minutes, I will invite my moderator up. I want to make one thing clear. I am doing my best to get as many of your voices into the discussion as possible. You must forgive me if I am unable to come to you. It is not my wish to forego anyone's contribution. However, unless you have packed enough clothes to stay here for 5 days, we must stick to our schedule briskly. So again, I apologize for not being able to come to everyone as much as I would love to. Bear with me. At the end of this panel, there will also be time for stakeholders and nations and delegates to contribute. So please do. Without any further ado, our moderator.
Good morning, everyone. Is it still morning?
No.
It's not? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi. Hello, everyone. Okay. So with that introduction that I wasn't expecting, it's a great pleasure to be hosting this panel right now to speak with some really exciting representatives of the private sector who are going to be, who make up this panel and who we're going to listen to really, really, really attentively. But just before I introduce them and call them up, well, maybe I'll ask you to join me up on stage. And I'll introduce you. They'll just have to look at you and not know who you are and wait patiently, and I'll introduce them. I think they want me to move. Oh, you want me to sit by my name? Yes, of course. Sharon, I think, oh, you want me here? Okay. If there wasn't a few logistical challenges, how would it be a panel? Okay, so over the past 1.5 days, you've heard a lot of data about the impact of climate, what it means for human mobility, what the perspective is for decades to come. So I'm not going to go through all of the data that my colleagues have very nicely put into my talking points, except to say that last year, 32 million people worldwide were displaced because of the impact of climate. And so for those that we're going to be speaking about today, it's a reality of their lives. It's these environmental pressures that force them to leave their families and their communities and look for opportunities elsewhere. And I just want us to have this as the backdrop for the discussion. Now, the second point I want to make is that, again, over the past 1.5 days, we've been talking about solutions and what do solutions look like. And at the heart of these solutions, and we heard DG Amy Pope speak about this yesterday, is the critical importance of partnerships. It's about collective action. And the private sector play a key role and are part of the collective. And the Paris Agreement actually recognized this and said that we need greater involvement of the private sector, whether through their actions to limit ecological footprint or through offering their technical expertise to develop innovative solutions to the challenges we face. And so, as an actor in this space, what we're going to be talking about today is the role that the private sector is playing. And so a couple of things, just in case you didn't know, the just transition and greening our world. Currently, there's a critical shortage of at least 7 million green energy workers. And this gap is especially acute when it comes to solar, wind, and biofuel technologies that we need for decarbonization. And this is according to new research from the Boston Consulting Group, Henderson Institute. When it comes to climate financing, we see private sector investment in climate adaptation as an untapped opportunity, especially as there's a critical gap right now in funding for global adaptation and especially the flows to developing countries. When we come to innovative financial models, the Green Climate Fund established by UNFCCC is a partnership that has invested so far almost $4 billion in private sector climate projects. And this is just one of many funds. So this really highlights that not just do they have a critical role in terms of the collective action that's required, but that there are specific areas where private sector expertise and what the value add that the private sector brings is going to be critical for us when we begin to think of the future that we want and the solutions for the impact of climate on people. And so today's discussions, we're going to showcase how the private sector is stepping up, how they are acting in working together with IOM to address the impact of climate on human mobility and their internal internal corporate commitments. And so without further ado, I have the honor of introducing our panelists for today's session. And I'll start off with, to my right, Sherwin Das. I'm not going to say the organization yet because I want them to introduce themselves. They introduced themselves. We had a discussion this morning and it was just so great. So I'm going to give them the opportunity to do so individually. And next to Sherwin is Andreas Marschner. And next to Andreas is Johan Harnos. And I think I'll turn to you, Sherwin, first to introduce yourself to our audience who is waiting with bated breath to know who you are beyond your names. So Sherwin?
Great, thank you, Ugochi, and I don't want to keep the audience waiting too much longer. It's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Sherwin Das. I am a co-founder and the managing director of an organization called Energy Peace Partners. We are a nonprofit organization based in the United States and Kenya. And the foundational idea of our organization is really quite simple, but very ambitious. And it is that renewable energy, as the world's principal climate solution, can support peace. We observed that the most conflict-affected countries in the world, the countries most at risk of conflict, also are the most vulnerable to climate change. And we've seen, and perhaps this has been talked about over the last 2 days, that climate change is exacerbating conflict dynamics in many of these countries, driving forced migration, for example. But we also observed that these countries, highest at risk for conflict, most vulnerable to climate change, also the least electrified countries in the world. So our work focuses on increasing climate finance flows, and the world's principal climate solution is renewable energy. Our work focuses on increasing climate finance flows, and in particular, renewable energy investment and development in these countries, highly affected by conflict, most climate vulnerable, and poorly electrified. And so I'm happy to be here and talk about the work that we do and talk about the solutions we've developed to increase, in particular, private sector involvement in helping to solve some of these problems and gaps in climate finance.
Thank you, Sherwin. And now, Andreas?
Thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Andreas Marschner. I'm Vice President for Amazon Transportation Services here in Europe, and in the dual role also responsible for sustainability across our worldwide operations at Amazon. Scale comes with responsibility. We have a large scale in the private sector. We are serving millions of customers on a daily basis, and that doesn't go without concentrating on how we can decarbonize our operations, how we can help advancing this transformation we are in and making sure this is happening faster than it was to date. And happy to be here, share some of the insights, what we are engaged in, how we are looking at some of the topics that have been discussed since yesterday morning, and hopefully also bring a few new insights to the table.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And Johan?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Johan Harnos. I'm a partner and director at BCG, working on topics of global migration. But I also wear another hat. So I'm a co-founder and CEO of an NGO called Imagine. We've been founded 5 years ago. We're a volunteer organization, maybe not representing youth anymore, but still a youthful organization and carried forward by many youthful volunteers. And our mission is that we believe talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And we believe, creating legal, safe pathways for migration can be a way to achieve that goal. And very happy to bring in both perspectives from the joint work that BCG is doing with IOM on establishing the business case for private sector engagement, and also the practical lessons learned we have from our work at Imagine. Looking forward.
So a round of applause for our great panelists that are going to speak about transformation.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started. And Johan, you spoke last, so you get the first question. So from your perspective, from your experience, and with your two hats, what role do you think the private sector can play in the solutions and for this to be meaningful and impactful?
Yeah, to make it short, obviously a big role, a key role, and maybe the role that makes a difference between success and failure in many of the initiatives that we in this room and many others are playing. But first of all, I like the way you frame it. You know, you're asking not which role the private sector should be playing, but which role it could and can be playing. And frankly, I think that's a very much needed change in tonality. You know, I think in the last years and decades, probably the predominant view on the private sector from international organizations and the NGO world, so including myself, was to look at the private sector and say, hey, can they be a good donor for us? Can they contribute financial means and funds? And frankly, if I may say so, how can we communicate with the private sector in a way that you know, it appeals to their corporate social responsibility or to altruistic motives? And I think there is a space for that, and it continues to be viable and important. But what we are doing at BCG is we're trying to excite the private sector also for a broader case that is more sustainable. You could call it, you know, the strategic advantage case, or the case that appeals to self-interest. And so the reasons for that, I think, are manifold. I mean, let's just use the big buzzwords: decarbonization, digital transformation, and demographic change. Those are big topics on the private sector agenda that translate immediately into business priorities, right? Like, how can you keep digitalizing your operations? Apologies for the business lingo here, but these are questions that are of concern to executives, and they have a link to global talent, right? Because speaking as a German, as a Berliner, if we look at the startup scene in Germany, it is companies like Zalando that are driving digital innovation and are making our lives better. And how do they do that? Look at the talent makeup of these companies. From day one, they started hiring globally. Yeah, and so doing that, obviously focusing on refugee and other pools of talent, but also broadening it to global talent more generally, is just one very obvious way that the private sector can make a difference. Yeah? And maybe one more thing before I let my colleagues also jump in. I like the new way that IOM is thinking about private sector engagement, right? So there's a role for income, you know, seeing and engaging with the private sector as a funder, but there's also a role for the private sector as a co-innovator, as a co-creator, bringing in expertise that I know Amazon and you have. You are bringing in your expertise, and you're helping IOM and others build better solutions through the expertise you bring, right? So it's income, it's innovation, and it's also many other ways to engage with the private sector. So I would love to leave it here, but again, it's about a new why, it's about a new reason to engage for the private sector. And I believe if we approach it from this perspective, we unlock transformative change that you know, we're seeing on climate action, right? 10 years ago, we were far from where we are when it comes to climate action. And my personal hope and aspiration is that we see a similar journey with private sector engagement on global migration as well.
Thank you very much, Johan. And now I come to Sherwin and Andreas. So, Sherwin, just building on what we've heard from Johan, and obviously with your perspective, and you spoke really passionately about the link between energy and peace, which is not something that happens intuitively. So, what are the the successful examples of partnership in the context of emergencies, humanitarian situations that are prompted by the impact of climate? And why was this partnership important for your organization? And Johan also spoke about, I mean, he called it strategic advantage business case, but in the language I understand, it's what's in it for us. So over to you, Sherwin.
Great, thanks. So I think it might be helpful to talk a little bit about the challenge or the problem that we saw and the solution that we developed to address that. So again, limited climate finance flows in fragile energy poor countries, He wanted to create a solution that would allow the private sector to participate and increase private sector finance flows to these countries, in particular to support renewable energy projects. Because in many of these countries, and I'm talking about the least electrified, most fragile countries, South Sudan, Somalia, DRC, Chad, Mali, Central African Republic, we found entrepreneurial organizations, because of the costs of solar, for example, had dropped so dramatically, building renewable energy systems to provide community electrification, but for them, access to finance, access to affordable finance was the biggest challenge. So we developed an instrument called the Peace Renewable Energy Credit, which is built on something that most corporations that procure renewable energy are familiar with. It's built on an instrument called a renewable energy credit. In Europe, they're called guarantees of origin. And so most corporations that procure renewable energy, they procure renewable energy credits, guarantees of origin. They have different names in different contexts. They procure these instruments to meet their net zero or 100% renewable energy goals. These certificates are issued from renewable energy systems in many countries in the developed world. And this instrument, the Renewable Energy Credit Instrument, has contributed to driving renewable energy growth worldwide. But this instrument effectively didn't exist in fragile states. And with few exceptions, it didn't exist on the African continent until a few years ago. So the idea of the Peace Renewable Energy Credit is that these certificates can be issued from high impact renewable energy projects in a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo, from projects that are providing first time community electrification, and they can be introduced into international renewable energy markets in a way that's familiar to corporations. And for corporations, this is a high social impact renewable energy credit. And because they use their budgets to procure these instruments, the idea of something that's familiar to them, but has these additional social benefits, social attributes, is very interesting. So what we did is we approached renewable energy project developers in countries like DRC and South Sudan, and we told them we can unlock a potential new revenue stream from the private sector by helping you find funders in the private sector that can support these renewable energy projects through a Peace Renewable Energy Credit Agreement. And since 2020, we have managed to facilitate a handful of PREC or Peace Rec transactions that have brought together companies like Microsoft, Google, and Block to support new renewable energy projects in Eastern DRC and in South Sudan. And I'm happy to report that IOM has been one of the organizations that has benefited from PREC supported funding. So in South Sudan, we worked with IOM to co-design a project that could be funded through a PREC agreement. And with them, we identified 2 hospital solar electrification projects. And in the meantime, a corporation called Block, which is a global technology company that focuses on financial services, had reached out to us, told us they are interested in learning more about the PREC and what could be supported by the PREC. And so after co-designing this project with IOM, we went to Block and said, look, you procure renewable energy certificates. This is a renewable energy certificate that is a high level of social impact. It's supporting a hospital solar electrification project where the hospital currently gets 2 to 3 hours of power. Funding will enable IOM to put on a 50 kilowatt peak solar system, will allow that hospital to stop or reduce significantly using their diesel by 85%, and allow that hospital to have 24/7 power and enhance the services that they provide to a community, many of which are displaced because of conflict and because of climate change. And as a result, in two separate agreements in 2021 and 2022, Block's support for those projects through the PREC has funded these two hospital electrification projects, increasing access to finance that has flowed from Block to two projects in DRC. So the key takeaway is, through this new solution that we've developed, we've been able to source and identify projects, the hardest to reach markets, that target the most vulnerable communities, introduce them into international renewable energy markets in a familiar way to corporations because it's built on an existing instrument that they're familiar with, communicate the high level of social impact about those projects, and get private sector actors like Block, Microsoft, and Google to support projects that they would not have ordinarily known about. And so we're very excited to have done that. We're in the early stages of developing the solution, and we're very, very excited and grateful that IOM has helped us launch this new instrument that allows the private sector to engage in supporting these communities in the hardest markets.
Thank you very much, Sherwin. Great example. I mean, and again, in my language, win-win solutions, but you've explained it far more. To a certain level of private sector, what would I say?
Panache.
Panache. And now, Andreas, we'd like to hear from you from the Amazon perspective.
So Sherwin, I already talked about the translation need, as Johan did as well. And I think what is very important is that there's a demystification that needs to happen when it's like, oh, is it the private sector and what's the role of the private sector? I think in many cases, a lot is happening already naturally because there is no translation need. For Amazon, we typically work backwards from our customers. Sustainability, decarbonization, a lower impact on the climate footprint matters to our customers. It matters for Amazon, and I'm only not talking about the customers, but I would also say it matters to our employees. So it is not that this is something mystically happening somewhere in a corporate boardroom, but it is an essential part in keeping our employees engaged, wanting to make a difference. And that is what's driving a lot of the things we do. Also, very often, it's no longer cost versus carbon reduction. In many cases, this also goes together. I give you a simple example. Since 2015, we have been investing heavily in reducing our packaging. The packaging need per any shipped unit we have has reduced in this period until today, so this is less than 8 years, by 41%. That in itself has reduced the need of packaging material on the Amazon side by more than 2 million tons. That, of course, has a carbon impact. Even if it's from recycled material, it still has a carbon impact, and it makes a big difference. It's just one of those examples. In our sites, we have more than 8,000 sustainability ambassadors who are engaged in their specific facility to help learn how we can make a difference on the specific premises on the decarbonization part. It's a lot of momentum that is built in there and what really makes a difference. Now, when it comes to the joint work we also have with IOM, we of course are aware that we have a lot of migration happening, and we also see a role for us to help support the refugee part there. And what we do is in places like the US, we launched the program we call Welcome Door, which means that we are giving specific support to refugees joining our operations and provide them, for instance, access to tools, how to verify what their degree would be translated into the new geography they entered, the potential new home, how to make sure they have access to a job. Just this June, we also made it public that we plan to have 5,000 refugees employed here in Europe by 2024. A similar story in the US by 2026. So there's a lot of commitment to also help on the migration pieces. And with IOM together, we have campaigns running within Amazon on the volunteering side, packaging health kits for the places where there is a need, where we might have either weather-based catastrophe or the earthquake just in Morocco, which allowed us with our dedicated disaster relief team to bring in support in a matter of hours and not days or weeks. And it's these type of things where we can leverage the skills we have. We have a product that might be needed, we can provide it. We know how to distribute it effectively and can leverage the logistics chains we have available. And that is where we are engaged, where our employees are engaged, and where we think we can build further momentum by making sure there is more partnership and deeper partnership between the public and the private sector.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So now something for all of you to respond to is based on what you've already shared, and of course you can bring in any other experience you think is relevant. What is key in driving collective action so that we can really make meaningful progress on the issue of the impact of climate and human mobility, and obviously in the context of the just transition? And all of you in your interventions highlighted, you know, the critical points that were important for you from your different vantage points. So that gives us a very, you know, I think we heard in the youth panel that the youth are a diverse group. It's the same in the private sector. You're also diverse. So recognizing this diversity, really keen to hear what you think is critical in success that is in terms of real meaningful progress. What do you think is going to be key for that within the collective? And I'll start with Johan.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. So what is key, and what have we learned both in our work at BCG and also at Imagine when we do this? Maybe two quick stories. The first story basically has the message to involve the private sector earlier, already in the design, when we do basically labor mobility partnerships, right? So I want to be very specific. Let's talk about one of these ways in which we can enable migrants to find work abroad, send back home remittances, and have many other positive effects on their home countries. I think these labor mobility pathways are a bit the talk of the town. I know IOM is involved through the country organizations in many, and many other international and NGO organizations are as well. Yeah? And so I like the fact that I think in the last nearly 10 years, many of these projects have been started, and over time, you know, people are also sharing their lessons learned. What I observed in these lessons learned sharing sessions is that if we're really honest, the true impact, if you look at the number of people moved through these labor mobility pathways, is still incredibly small, right? So let's not even start comparing that impact with the one that you at Amazon have when you hire and employ 5,000 refugees. But if you look at your average labor mobility program, and I think many in this room sort of know this, you look at tens of people, or if it's a good program, maybe 100 people moved, even over a 2, 3, or 4 year horizon, right? So I think let's acknowledge we're really in an experimental stage here. I think phase 1, when we were designing and building these labor mobility pathways, it was essentially, you know, everybody just get going, and, you know, everybody was working their own silos, and that was good as a start. But I think in the future, what we need to do is maybe have an ecosystem approach. And apologies if that's just another buzzword here, but you know, it would essentially ask the question: what is the role of IOM when setting up these pathways? Is IOM or others, do you actually have a role in building them and delivering them? Or is your role maybe in funding, in creating incentive schemes? You were also talking about the need maybe for new instruments, maybe even income sharing agreements. So I think there are very creative new ways to basically create ecosystems that then allow many others to build novel solutions on top that can also scale. Yeah, and key to that is, in my view, bringing the business side in very early so that you're not in a situation where you've kicked off your program, you have your first talent that wants to move, and you're in a bit of a push mode whereby now you have the talent, and very late in the process, you start knocking doors of businesses and asking them, do you want to hire these people? Yeah, it will never really work in this way very well. So that's one story. And the other story is actually taking a hard look at the private sector. And I would like to encourage all of you also to see that you can help the private sector. So I like your notion of demystifying the private sector. And, you know, of course, there are the Amazons of this world and the big other companies that probably don't need any help when it comes to hiring and upskilling refugees and migrants. But there are many, many other companies, not just the small and mid-sized ones, even the big ones, who essentially often do not have a lot of experience when it comes to hiring internationally. Because of that lack of experience, they have lots of cultural barriers even. They have lots of questions when it comes to visa and other aspects of the overall process. And so I believe you in this room and many in this community can actually play a very helpful role, actually also nudging forward the private sector in demystifying, who are these migrants, who are the talents that we're talking about, how do visa processes work, etc. Yeah, so I want you to take that as a source of inspiration.
Thank you, Johan. And now, Andreas?
Well, what I would add to what Johan has just said is the first piece, what we need to make sure is we need to bring partners along. On the Amazon side, we made ourselves a big commitment back in 2019 when we were co-founder of the Climate Pledge and also the first signatory to it, where we committed for all of Amazon, all of its operations to be carbon neutral by 2040. So 10 years early to the Paris Agreement. Given what we do, and that is all of our operations, the cloud computing, all of that is included, that's a Herculean task. We are doing a lot of transportation, one of the most difficult to decarbonize sectors. And so what we built with the Climate Pledge is now a network of partners who basically have subscribed to the same goal. And it's many different industries which are represented there. Which are suppliers to our operations, which might be customer of our operations. The same story, it spreads over more than 50 countries by now, and it helps build a network of partners who are committed to achieve decarbonization faster, and therefore there's a mutual exchange and interest to actually drive the overall transformation much, much bigger. So bringing partners along, I would say, is the first one. The second piece is, we need to invest and we need to innovate, and we need to be cognizant that unless we are willing to learn fast, which comes along with also being willing to fail fast, this is not going to happen. In many organizations, the classic logic would be if we have a failure of a project, of a program, that this is a big negative impact on your career. So you want to prevent that from happening. If we talk about the massive transformation we need to go through on the decarbonization journey, we don't have the luxury to wait. We need to learn really, really fast. And that means we need to embrace failure as a positive piece. We don't want to make the same mistake twice or 3 times. So we need to make sure that we're also learning how to avoid not making the same mistake again, but innovating fast, investing in the transformation by knowing that not everything will work at first try is absolutely critical. And so those are, I think, the two elements I would add to what Johan has just shared, but definitely the way how we are approaching the transformation. And yes, not all the technologies are ready, in particular in the transportation sector. If you go to maritime shipping, if you go to heavy goods vehicles, if you go to grid infrastructure availability for charging and so on. But unless we are doubling down on learning quicker, innovating faster, the change is not going to happen.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And now Sherwin?
Sure, just a few additional thoughts so as not to repeat what Johan and Andreas have said. From our experience, when we began this journey to develop this solution, we saw that there was an increasing appetite on the part of the private sector to have more impact on the environmental front. Are we doing enough to address the climate crisis? Is the way we procure renewable energy doing enough? So initiatives like 24/7 and others have emerged. And then there was also increasing appetite to blend environmental impact with social impact. And so we were encouraged enough to develop this instrument, but we've developed one instrument and there is a huge need for more and more solutions. The second thing is that we have found with our partners, and Andreas referred to it, there's an important signaling aspect that corporate leaders like Amazon and others have when they support an innovation, or when they support a solution, or when they do things for the first time, that the first followers will pay attention to. So to support collective action, you need corporate leaders like Amazon and others investing in those solutions, investing in those communities, showing that it's worth supporting a project in Goma in Eastern DRC, for example, or in Malakal in South Sudan. The third thing, and this is evident, leadership in these organizations is critical. So the project that I described earlier, where IOM was able to leverage the Peace Renewable Energy Credit to support these hospital solar electrification projects, and I will give a specific shout out to IOM. These projects happened because your current Director General, Amy Pope, was the Deputy Director General when we were developing these projects, fully supported this idea of using a new innovative financing mechanism to support the communities that they serve. And so my own background is that I spent 10 years working for the United Nations in peacekeeping missions and political missions in conflict-affected and fragile states. And I can tell you from experience, for the UN organizations that I worked for, innovation and financial innovation were not buzzwords you heard in the hallways very often. So the fact that a UN organization was able to believe in and support a new financing mechanism to enhance their work is quite extraordinary. And now you have the first UN entity that has leveraged this new solution to fund a project, creating a replicable model for the entire UN system potentially. And as some of you who may have exposure to UN financial rules and regulations, UN procurement, it's not easy. So when the leadership of UN organization supports something, the entire organization mobilizes on the legal contractual side, the mission in South Sudan to make it happen. So leadership is really critical, and it's critical, it has been critical for us on the IOM side with DG Amy Pope and her sustainability team. And it also has been critical on the private sector side because for new solutions, you often need a champion inside the corporation who's pushing for that solution, who's pushing for that innovation, and that could be somebody on the corporate sustainable responsibility, corporate social responsibility side, or the sustainability side, but often it takes an internal champion or a leader in that organization to really push a solution forward, and that's been our experience. Final thing I'll say is that, again, getting back to your question of collective action, for us, we are really just scratching the surface of getting the private sector to help solve some of these global challenges. And again, our lens is, how can we support renewable energy in the least electrified, most fragile countries, and bring corporates, allow corporates and enable corporates to engage in supporting solutions in those places. And so we have been working on developing a campaign which highlights the opportunities that exist for corporates to engage in these communities to help increase incentives for more corporate engagement, but also to support many of these communities leapfrog from reliance on diesel generators in many of these communities, which have no electricity infrastructure, to leapfrog from the use of diesel for power to clean electrification at scale that can help make the renewable energy revolution much more equitable than it has been.
Thank you very much. Really, really super interesting. And I was just taking note of some of the buzzwords, concepts, action that all of you have spoken about. So these include, really quickly, co-creating early, demystifying, doubling down to innovate, embracing failure, connecting, networking, building the ecosystem, achieving both environmental and social impact, the role of leadership, the vision of leadership, having champions to have progress at scale. Okay? So now I need to flip it. Having gotten you to focus on scale, I now need to flip it and in a way, not in a way, actually zero down to what's most difficult, but actually critically important. Marginalized, the most vulnerable, the hardest to reach, those with the least access. So how do we make sure that everything that we've just been talking about and all of these actions to go to scale do not leave the most marginalized behind? Maybe I start with you, Andreas.
I mentioned already some of the efforts we are engaged in, but it is always, of course, the question, how can we help, first and foremost, if there is a crisis in this crisis environment? And that is where our disaster relief effort really kicks in, which we also needed to learn quite a bit how to interact with organizations which have the boots on the ground and enable them to do that. And the joint work with IOM has helped us to get much better in how to ensure that our logistics capabilities, the product we have available that might be needed, makes it very quickly to the places where they are needed in those circumstances. And if I think a few years back, it would have taken us much longer than it takes us now to provide support in these type of crisis situations. The other part, as I mentioned before, is about providing equal opportunities to the people who are joining our environment. We are fully aware that if somebody has gone through a refugee situation, is in different needs than the local employee joining a job. And that's why we have dedicated programs established for these employees joining our operations to get the right support, from individual coaching, from our employee assistance program, to ensure that their need or the challenges they need to go through, potentially also having family back in their home country that are in a difficult situation, how we can help and support them in such a difficult situation. I mentioned some of those programs like Career Choice, which we have for a broad part of our employees as availability, which provides the opportunity from language courses to the college degree to get the support from Amazon to help making not only a living but a career and advance and have social mobility in our environment. And those are critical elements that we are bringing to them. One other piece, which of course is something we see as a big contributor as well, is providing access to the Amazon customers. And so in many of those places which are difficult and challenged by crises, there's a lot of ideas, innovation. There might be wonderful product that is available, but the problem is how to connect this product to customers who actually wanting to buy it. And this is where, of course, our website can play a big role, providing opportunities. And we have really interesting examples how in these type of situations we are able to provide a much better business and growth environment for people in very remote rural communities to actually have access to a very large customer group that is interested and willing to buy their product, and then also helping up the logistics for it. Is that always easy? Is that not tedious? I would lie to say that it is. It starts with customs and many other challenges that then can play a role. But that is what we are good at and what we can help and are happy to provide to make a difference.
Thank you. Great example of last mile solutions. Okay, Sherwin.
I mean, that's sort of in our DNA. The name of the organization is Energy Peace Partners. The name of the instrument solution we developed is called the Peace Renewable Energy Credit. We're focused on really the hardest to reach communities for whom access to finance or a renewable energy project has been extremely, extremely challenging. So I'll give you an example of the inaugural Peace Renewable Energy Credit project. We were able to work with a solar mini-grid developer in Eastern DRC who had financed and constructed a mini-grid that was providing first-time electrification for communities. So we went to them and we said, we think we can unlock an additional revenue stream through PRECs for you. And, but we want you to consult the community and find out if there's an additional project that could be supported. And so they co-designed a project with the community to introduce community streetlights. Very simple intervention, but this was a neighborhood in Goma called Ndosho, where there was a high level of insecurity and banditry and criminality at night, especially for women and girls. And all the businesses that were operating during the day had to close immediately when the sun went down. So we presented this project to Microsoft and they were really compelled by it. And so they agreed to support it through this PREC instrument. And it allowed streetlights to be installed in this community. And we saw the result of that project. It transformed the community. The businesses were able to stay open at night. Night markets opened. It increased road safety. It increased security. It really was transformative, but it was a fairly simple intervention which was able to connect Microsoft and Microsoft's corporate renewable energy budget with this really transformative project on the ground that is impacting the lives of 28,000 people. So it's in our DNA to source projects like this. We have a team in Nairobi, and all they do is talk with local partners on the ground, typically commercial renewable energy developers who need an additional income stream. And so what we're doing now after these initial pilot transactions with IOM, with Microsoft, with Block, with Google, is we're scaling up this instrument and we're trying to support as many projects as possible. And we developed a financing facility to support a portfolio, a $90 million portfolio of new high impact renewable energy projects in South Sudan, Somalia, Chad, Nigeria, in really the hardest to reach communities, targeting the most vulnerable, because that's where we think we can have the greatest impact, and that's where we see the private sector is motivated to make a difference. They just need an entry point. Thank you. And Johan?
Yeah, let me be brief, but it's a huge question and I wish I had all of the answers. Maybe a quick story from the work that we do at Imagine. So when we started originally, we simply wanted to help people cross borders. And evidently, we started with a demographic that was clearly not the most vulnerable. We started with folks out of Egypt. We were leveraging the proximity to Europe. On purpose, we did not work with folks in Europe because of the free labor movement already. But still, we started with a demographic that was not much vulnerable. We started with folks who had completed university level education. But now fast forward, last year, basically influenced by the situation in Afghanistan and by seeing the lack of action also by the German government when it comes to supporting and rescuing the most vulnerable, of course, women in Afghanistan, we set up a little team of volunteers and we decided to focus specifically one very small program on that demographic. So we were looking at women who had started some level of studies. So you could argue, are they the most of the most vulnerable in the country? Maybe not, but I would venture if we talk Afghanistan, if we talk women in Afghanistan, comparably speaking, I think it's definitely a demographic that deserves not just our sympathy, but our active support. And so what we did is, and here's the key, my thesis is even for the most vulnerable demographies, technology can be part of the answer, right? So let's not underestimate the degree of digital and mobile phone penetration even among the most vulnerable in the world. And that's a tremendous gift. And that's one that we used. So, you know, fast forward over the last year and with some support also from other funders, we identified out of 250 people that applied, 10 women who are now on the way to Germany. They will start and continue their studies in Germany. They will be in a place of safety, and all of that through a small team of volunteers leveraged by technology. Yeah, and so I think this is possible. Happy to go into details on how we do it, but frankly, if we can do it, then and anybody else should be able to do it as well. And again, if we look at the numbers right now, we don't see it. Right, so my German friends in the room, they will know these numbers and will also not be proud of them, but let me say them once here. Germany has a program to resettle Afghan refugees. It was announced 18 months ago. And the target was to bring over 20,000 of the most vulnerable Afghan people, some of which German entities had collaborated with pre-Taliban. And so 20,000 was the goal. The actual number of people resettled out of Afghanistan was not 1,000, was not 100, wasn't 10, it is 0. Yeah? So that is the level of, you know, difficulty that maybe our largest institutional partners and national governments struggle with when they try to serve the most vulnerable. And I believe here again, the private sector, NGO sector, through the use of digital technology can really make a difference.
Thank you, Johan, and thank you to all of our panelists. I mean, our task was to show how partnerships with the private sector are transformational for climate action, and I think you've all demonstrated that. But I think you've also really been inspirational, because what has come through in everything that you have said is your real belief in what this action will lead to, and the extent to which you have invested in what is difficult and not easy, and recognize we still have to do more, but with firm commitment. So I'm deeply appreciative, and we're all appreciative, right? But we've done a lot of talking up here, and now I turn over to our fabulous MC, who is going to facilitate, coordinate, moderate the Q&A part.
Certainly will do my best, moderator. Thank you so much for your contributions. I have two delegates and stakeholders that want to speak now, that want to have an intervention. If there are any more, please do let us know. So I'm going to take them two at a time. How do you fancy that, just to make it, to get more through? So we have Akal, AKAL. Are they in the room? Can you wave your tag so we know where you are?
I think so.
Can you see them? There, Akal, please, if you have a statement, make the statement, and then if you have a question, please also do that. And then we'll move to Iran.
Merci, je vais m'exprimer en français. Je suis le président.
Thank you very much. I am the president and founder of ACAL. It is a NGO based in Geneva. And I've heard a lot of people since yesterday talking about solutions, what could be implemented. And it's true that resources, the funding is essential. Member of the diaspora born in Europe, if we want to develop the African continent, we'll need a year to be involved. I believe that all the resources needed for the energy transition, all the raw material comes from Africa. But Africa is not a winning partner in this type of trade. Since the Marshall Plan, the trade has always been unilateral. And that's why we created the first Euro-African brand in accordance to the Swiss standard. And I'm saying Swiss standards because we're going to need to work all together for the long run. So why did we use the Swiss standards for this Euro-African brand? It's also because we've had a long and difficult history with Europe related to colonization. So we are trying to develop a solution. We developed this brand working with our African partners. We are currently negotiating with African governments like in Chad, Senegal, Morocco, Congo, Cameroon, Algeria, and Libya. Today in Africa, we don't need help. We've got everything we need. Raw materials come from Africa. The only thing Africans don't have is an international brand to market their products. Today, if we want to find a solution on human mobility, on migration, we have to accept that migration is not only related to climate change, but also to conflict, to economic opportunities. To generate a trust relation, you need to secure a labelized and be dynamic in your approach. We gathered different cooperatives in Senegal, in Morocco, or in other countries in Africa to create a production ground that then will enable us to have quality products for the European market, but also simplify trade, because ACL France, Geneva, Morocco, or Senegal will be able to exchange, to trade, because standards will be the same. We also have to acknowledge that families in Africa also have families in Europe. I have family in Morocco, but I'm also here. So we created this whole system based on our heritage. If you know the book John Ward Griffin, well, that's exactly what we did. For 2 years, we lived in the street with all the migrants to understand their problems, understand their needs, their aspirations. Once we took all that into account, the outcome was clear. All the migrants told us, if we could have a brand in our country to develop our own products recognized internationally, we would stay home. Why coming over here? I hope we will have the support today of international partners, including IOM, and officially we will open in 2 months the first showroom for development here in Geneva. We hope you will support us. Thank you very much.
A contribution from an intervention from Iran, and then we'll move on. There are quite a few people to get through.
Thank you very much, moderator. I should also thank the DG Daniels for the presentation, and actually we are benefiting from the views of the panelists. Actually, the national platforms could be one of the best options to increase the engagement of the private sector. For instance, at the Iranian National Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, the private sector could share their ideas with governmental officials to exchange their initiatives and best practices to achieve a resilient future. It is obvious that we need to the whole of society approach, and the private sector could narrow down the gaps. The private sector not only could work on investment, but also on technical support. They could make a meaningful contribution. One of the key gaps is that the private sector is usually seen as a source of finance, but the reality is that they have innovative and smart experts that could work shoulder by shoulder with the government to address climate action and mobility. In this way, the second international exhibition event of a strong Iranian disaster management 2023 will be held from 24 to 26 of December in Tehran, and we invited international startups and private companies to this event to share their ideas for climate action and disaster risk reduction. Actually, when I'm talking about the private sector, I couldn't talk about the sanctions that imposed to my country. And because of the experiences, I could give you an example. Actually, I wanted to talk about the butterfly disease. It's a generic rare one disease that majority children suffering from that. It's affected on the skin, and actually the child's not having any skin. Therefore, there is a special bandage that should be take care of the child. There is only one Swedish company that's producing this bandage, but not selling to Iran. Why? Because of the sanction against the banking system. They don't want, the private sector, they don't want to be any problem. Because if they are selling goods to Iran, they would be suffering afterwards. But what about the humanitarian issue? Mm-hmm. But we have a resolution on the general, in the Secretary Council resolution that recently endorsed about that issue, that the humanitarian assistance and humanitarian issues should not be involved in the involving sanctions. But still we have problem to buy these bandages. But last time, according to working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we working together with the UNICEF to buy this bandage. And because of the difficulties afterwards, we have small and medium companies we called in Iran knowledge enterprise. It's some type of the private sector, small companies that they work on the base of the science and technology and masters of the university. Let me finish that, please. These companies, recently, they produced this new bandage for this child. these children actually. Therefore, we are in the capacity to exporting to the world actually. Then I should thank again and appreciate. Thank you.
So do you want, is that final point your question to the panel? Is there a problem with the problem?
As I mentioned to you, I don't have, on the basis of the experiences that we have, actually, we don't have any questions, but it's just clarification and explanation. Thank you very much.
Moderator, it's entirely up to you which of those you want to take on.
What I think we will do in the interest of time and to give people the opportunity to speak is that we'll go to member states and then I'll let each panelist respond to what they feel is most relevant to their experience and organization.
Let's go to Nigeria. I think you have an intervention.
Thank you. I actually have a question. Thank you, DDG, for your excellent moderation, and thank you also to the panelists for such an insightful and thought-provoking discussion. Indeed, partnerships are essential to solutions, and I think about the previous panel that we had here today, which was focused on youth and the nexus between youth and climate change. In Africa, we have over 60% of our youth population, 60% of our population are comprised of the youth. And so my question to the panel is, do you have any cross-regional youth organizations? Do you focus on partnerships on any cross-regional youth organizations to prefer solutions on climate change in relation to the youth? And if you don't, is it something that you're thinking about or to promote such a concept so that there will be indeed sustainable partnerships for such solutions?
Thank you, Nigeria, for that intervention, for that question. Brazil, I think there's a comment or a question from Brazil.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I haven't taken the floor so far. My name is Ana Mamede. I'm the Deputy Head of the Division for Humanitarian Affairs and Migration at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Well, actually, I have an intervention, but I really like to thank the DDG and all the panelists, not only from this panel, but also from all of the days of the discussions, for very enlightening and rich change of ideas, which I think will be crucial in this time where, as highlighted by the IPCC and many other delegations, climate and extreme weather events are increasingly driving displacement across all regions of the world. Brazil has taken a leading role on this matter. Our migration law provides the legal basis for granting humanitarian visas to individuals affected by disasters, among other circumstances. This policy benefits nationals from Haiti since 2012, and more than 90,000 people were granted visas so far. We believe that addressing the nexus between climate change and human mobility requires a multifaceted and comprehensive approach. The findings of the IPCC show that migration is cross-cutting and complex by nature, and the impacts of climatic drivers on migration are highly context-specific as they interact with social, political, geopolitical, and economic drivers. Driven by the sense of urgency and gravity that the best available science warns us to, the new Brazilian government has put the fight against climate change a top priority. Only in the first 8 months of 2023, deforestation fell by 48%. And deeply committed to strengthening multilateralism, Brazil has offered to host the 30th Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC in the Amazonian city of Belém in 2025. But future migration and displacement patterns in a changing climate will depend not only on the physical impacts of climate change, but also on future policies and planning at all scales of governance. That means we need to join efforts to increase and improve that data collection, registration, and reporting of displacement patterns, along with strengthening early warning systems to prepare communities for climate-related disasters, which was so well explained by our panelists here on the role of the private sector in this. So by enhancing adaptive capacities, we can minimize the adverse effects of climate-related displacement, as it improves the degree of choice under which migration decisions are made, ensuring safe and orderly movements of people within and between countries. Mindful of our common but differentiated responsibilities, we must find ways to scale up financing in a way that it does not imply additional burden to the ones that have historically contributed the least to the rise of the global temperature. Ladies and gentlemen, as we stand at the crossroads of climate challenges and human mobility, let us join efforts to build a sustainable and resilient future in all its dimensions and complexity. I thank you.
Thank you. We have one more moderator, and then I'll let you do what you will with the comments you have, the interventions and the questions. The IOM.
Yes, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, DDG.
I was just trying to tell the moderator there are two more on this side.
If I can get to them, I will do my best.
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you for these excellent examples and collaborations that the panel already highlighted. I think these conversations are essential to actually demystify and talk the same language. So really, it was excellent to hear from you and have partners on the panel discussing this together with also member states. I think the private and the public sector already knows what we need to do. We know what the commitments are on climate action and of course on migration as well. And my question is very, very short. How can we do it faster and more efficiently, and how can we do more of that? And I think this links back to the youth panel that we had just before. So I would love to maybe hear from Energy Peace Partners or anyone else from the panel, how can we do this faster and how can we do more? And I'm excited about these partnerships. Thank you.
I shall give you the next 2 or 3 minutes to be able to tackle all of that.
I think what I will do is turn to our panelists as part of also their closing to respond to what they've heard from our dear participants. So maybe I'll start with Sherwin.
So I can address maybe the last question. So how can we do what we're doing faster and accelerate? So from our experience with IOM, again, we're working with IOM. We facilitated a couple of projects in South Sudan. So just taking that as the example, the way to accelerate that is by showcasing these projects, demonstrating this as an example of public-private sector collaboration, showing that the private and public sector can have a shared vision and can find a way to collaborate to address the most vulnerable communities affected by conflict and climate change. I would say the second thing that we need to do is offer data and evidence showing what the impact is. So from our side, we've actually developed a methodology to begin to measure and track and show what the community level social impacts are of a renewable energy project in a fragile state. And the idea for that is that we know that renewable energy is an enabler. In general, it can support better health, education outcomes, increase livelihoods. But again, our thesis is that it actually can make a contribution to peace in the most conflict-affected states. So the idea for our data collection work, which will be for these two projects around which we've collaborated with IOM, is to be able to show what the community level social impacts are, what the peace impacts are. And if we are successful in doing that, the idea is we will be able to mobilize even more private sector investment for these kinds of climate-friendly projects in countries like South Sudan. The third thing I would say is on the IOM side, IOM, as well as a number of other UN operations and agencies working in fragile states, are trying to figure out how to finance their green energy transitions and also ensure that the communities that they serve benefit. And so that's a larger conversation. There are no easy, quick solutions to that, but we've been a partner of IOM now for a few years, so I would say we would just continue to accompany you on that journey and would look forward to being part of that conversation. I have another comment, but maybe I've taken up too much time, so maybe I'll let my colleagues intervene if they would like.
Thank you, Sharon. Can I go on to you, Andreas? And you can respond to any of the comments, but I'm just thinking maybe because of Amazon's size, you have some experience in terms of interacting with governments. Is there, because there was a question in that regard. I don't know.
So I try to keep it short. I think we need to intensify the dialogue that is happening because there's too much lost in translation. What we see, we still tend to speak different languages instead of a unified language, and that will then also enable far more collaboration on the ground. The other pieces, at least from my own perspective, I re-emphasize the topic, we need to embrace failure. Because if it's all about having the perfect working piece, this will take way too long. And that is the part I would suggest there, because it then also makes collaboration much, much easier if it's not then a finger pointing at the end.
Thank you. Johan?
Yeah, so many questions, and happy to continue the conversation over lunch. If I take the one asking how can we make faster progress, maybe at bigger scale, I was just reflecting and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if at IDM 2024, right, in 1 year's time, like we would actually have seen some action that we're talking about here, right? And so I was thinking, okay, what action are we dreaming about? And I mean, it would certainly be nice to say, look, there are now even more corporate partners who have direct, deep, one-on-one relationships with IOM that include income, but even more and innovation. So that would be nice. And frankly, I expect this will happen out of the energy in the room here today. But then even what else could happen, right? And so what if, today is a day that sparks this idea, which basically means, look, we all agree we'll probably need more safe and legal pathways for migration. If we just have them between one origin and one destination, they will likely be subscale. And okay, I'll accelerate even further. Yeah, but so picture this: you have big companies with digital capabilities committed to building this, to building potentially something like a digital platform that is something like a global labor market where people in origin countries can find good paying and valuable jobs in destination countries enabled by other training and other providers, recruiters, private sector on the platform already, and not just one IOM country organization, but 2, 3, 5 or others with one goal and aligned incentives. That would be, I think, something really new, and I'm sure we will see this at some point, and I hope maybe even starting next year. Looking forward.
Okay, I have been told very nicely that it was 3 minutes, and now my mic is falling, that we were 3 minutes over time. So first and foremost, deep, deep, deep appreciation, Sherwin, Andreas, Johan, all of you for absolutely great questions. I think in terms of takeaways from this session, not only are transformational partnerships happening, not only is the private sector stepping up on climate action, but I do take strongly the point about the ecosystem, co-creating early. Andreas, as you said, that we need to keep talking and engage, and it's part of the demystification. And Johan, almost a call to action in terms of how we are all going to work together, moving forward collectively faster, at scale, not afraid to fail, and learn, but also, and critically important also for me personally, and Sherwin, you highlighted this, not leaving behind the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, and those with the least access. This is an agenda for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Speaking of failure, my failure to keep time is certainly on my mind here. Thank you so much to our panelists and to our moderator. As I introduce the next sort of event, it's my wish to ask you to perhaps get off stage at the same time. We have another performance now, a cultural performance by the band IOM. Thank you.
Que as deusas me livrem de um povo que não veio do mar, que é berço de Netuno, é casa de Iemanjá, quem costura misturas. Que as deusas me livrem de um povo que não canta pra lua, testemunha oculto ou presente de amor ou da falta deles. Um mar que mistura histórias de amor, de marés e de luar. O mar se encantou com a lua, e noite de bem-querer. O mar quis fazê-la sua, deixou-se ser. O mar ama a lua ama seu amar. É no regaço da maré que balança o luar. O mar ama a lua ama o seu amar. É no regaço da maré que balança o luar. A maré se enchia, Iara, com seus braços d'água, Iara, pra alcançar a lua, Iara, em ponta dos pés, Iara. A lua poente, Iererê, corre pro horizonte, Iara, procurando a fonte que lhe dá o prazer. This is a samba from Angola, the grandfather of samba. Cantou com a lua, iererê, e noite de bem-querer. O mar quis fazê-la sua, e a lua deixou-se ser. E na lua cheia se enchia de graça e lhe invadia, prateando a escuridão. O mar se vestia de espelho d'água e refletia sua imagem da paixão. O mar ama a lua ama o seu amar. É no regaço da maré que balança o luar. O mar ama a lua ama o seu amar. É no regaço da maré que balança o luar. Linda história de amor entre a maré e o luar. Só a noite pra testemunhar. Linda uma história de amor e tanto querer não bastou. Foi o adeus quando o sol raiou. Thank you so much. Mais. Ahora hacemos una canción que está inspirada en el agua.
This song is inspired in water, the water we all have inside our bodies. The song speaks about women. By the way, I am very happy to be here in this podium and see so many women sitting in the different panel discussions. It's very important to include women's perspectives in order to understand the world, in order to understand the importance to combine elements, water, etc. So this is what the song speaks about. Thank you.
Me deixe ser, não tem razão. Vou permitir minha antipatia. Não é com você, não é ingratidão. Eu nem quero saber o que me angustia. Vou observar e logo vai passar. Antes do sol se pôr, eu volto a ser quem sou. Anseio a explosão que acende o coração. E sem mais lamentar, sou quem você queria. Sou pausa em movimento, um corpo bravio. Sou brisa e calmaria, um vento bravio. Broto de pedra em gota, eu já sou um rio em busca do mar. Sou pausa em movimento, um corpo bravio. Sou brisa e calmaria, um vento bravio. Broto de pedra em gota, eu já sou um rio em busca do mar. Sim ou não, sou claro, sou escuro, sou prosa ou poesia. Eu quero ser mãe ou também meretriz, sem nunca me culpar pelo que eu quis. Eu vou transbordar como um copo de fel, onde antes eu fui mel, hoje eu sou nostalgia. E ainda vou ser eu como cada dia, quando te encontrar em nossa fantasia. pedra em gota eu já sou um rio em busca do mar. Sou pausa em movimento, um corpo bravio. Sou brisa e calmaria, um vento bravio. Broto de pedra em gota eu já sou um rio em busca do mar. Sou paz em movimento, um corpo bravio. Sou brisa e calmaria, um vento bravio. Broto de pedra em gota eu já sou um rio em busca do mar. Eu vou em busca do mar. Eu vou em busca do mar. Eu vou.
Obrigado.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Play our last music. Thank you, everybody, for the escuta carinhosa. I'm sorry, I don't know how can I say this in English. Thank you, Milena. Let's dance the last song. It's a frevo. Frevo, it's a rhythm from Brazil. That's mean boiled. So you can imagine the effect that can bring us. So let's enjoy this last song together. Thank you a lot. Deixa eu te levar nessa dança da vida. Cede ao meu passo, jogue o meu jogo. Tenta entender e não resistir. Não vou desistir até ficar rendida. Deixa eu escolher a vida que eu divido. Não me julgue mal, nem me chame tirana. Tenta entender, para eu existir. Não vou desistir dessa história de amor. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Eu não te quero mais, eu me quero mais, eu não te quero mais, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Eu não te quero mais, eu me quero mais. Deixa eu te levar nessa dança da vida. Cede ao meu passo, jogue o meu jogo. Tenta entender e não resistir. Eu não vou desistir até ficar rendida. Deixa eu escolher a vida que eu divido. Não me julgue mal, nem me chame tirana. Tenta entender, para eu desistir. Não vou desistir dessa história de amor. Dessa história de amor, eu não vou desistir. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Eu não te quero mais, porque eu me quero mais. Eu não te quero mais, porque eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Se tu já não me queres, eu me quero mais. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Obrigada.
Good to see everybody getting up and enjoying that music. Thank you so much to the band IM. Thank you for getting us all grooving. I hope you've been able to help yourself to a few of the sandwiches that are sort of lined at the back there. Before I get on to the next order of business and the last two speakers that we have, the Director General and the Deputy Director General, I just want to draw your attention to this. Wow, never quietened a room quite as much as that. Have you seen these dotted around on your tables? You should be able to see them. If not, you've probably seen them at the entrance. You have come into contact with this QR code. If you haven't, there it is. And if you're far at the back and you think that you can't see it, zoom in with your cameras and it will capture this QR code. The QR code will take you to the survey specifically for your experiences of this IDM by IOM. So if you have the opportunity, if you are willing to give me a moment of your time, we would greatly appreciate your contribution by filling out the survey. Not everybody's favorite thing to do, but necessary. So if you just click on the QR code from your phone's camera app, this should take you directly to the site so that you may fill out the form. The form should take you 1 minute. Depends how much you've got to say. It might take you less, it might take you more, but I can't encourage you enough to be able to do that. So if you do it, that's fantastic. If not, you could do it later on. You have these little codes. I'll be back in just one moment. Okay. Brilliant. So we move on now to the final 2 points on our agenda. We are hurtling towards the end of this year's IDM, and I would encourage you to take your seats if you can, because up next we have the final two speakers. First, welcoming them back onto the stage is the Deputy Director General for Operations of the IOM, Gucci Daniels, to make their remarks specifically about the flagship policy paper, Thinking About Tomorrow, Acting Today, the Future of Climate Mobility, and also making their final remarks. Please help me in welcoming back to the stage the DDG.
Okay, it's great to be up here once again at the end of a really amazing 2 days. Well, amazing for me. I hope it was amazing for all of you. We've really benefited from rich discussions and ideas put forward and the perspectives over, well, a day and a half, not quite 2 days. And when we were, and I say we, but it was really the motivation and inspiration behind this was our new DG, because she really wanted to bring together different viewpoints on climate mobility from different geographies and stakeholders. And yesterday we heard from all of you representing governments, both at national and local level, regional groups, our sister UN agencies, and civil society. And in addition to hearing from the migration community, there were voices from the climate change, development, and disaster risk reduction sectors as well. And not to mention, of course, the beautiful singing voices that we've enjoyed yesterday and today. So it was our great pleasure to bring to Geneva insights from our regional consultations. You all heard from our regional directors. And that was a way to bring us closer to the realities on the ground, and something that's really hard to achieve when we're having these type of global level discussions. And I'm particularly happy that throughout yesterday and today, we were able to hear from the youth. I always say I'm a young person and my children remind me that I'm not, so I will go with I'm young at heart, but that we've been able to have meaningful exchange with our youth representatives, as well as with our private sector, and that was the panel I had the honor to moderate. And what the discussion has clearly showed is that these two constituencies, the youth and the private sector, are central to unlocking the positive potential of climate migration and migration more broadly. And they're also key in coming up with solutions. So the diversity, as well as the number of ideas put forward, give me an impossible task of trying to sum up the discussion. And I'm not even going to attempt to be exhaustive, but I just want to highlight what has been the recurring messages over the past 2 days. So first of all is the urgency of addressing climate mobility has never been greater. We've heard this loud and clear. We can't talk about climate change without talking about human mobility. We have the international agreements that bear witness to the urgency for addressing climate change, but we also have the frameworks for solutions. We have the Global Compact for Migration, we have the Paris Agreement, and we have the Sendai Framework. We also heard about regional agreements and processes, the Pacific Islands Forum, and of course, the expansion of the Kampala Declaration. So we've heard many positive examples at national, local, and international levels, but we agree that we need to do more and we need to do it faster. The second key message that we've heard is that action on climate change and human mobility has to be proactive and forward-looking. We cannot be reactive. We have to anticipate better and be prepared for the changes we know that are to come. And at the heart of being able to do that is data. We've heard how IOM is advancing in this area and how our partners are helping us put data and evidence at the front so we can anticipate better. But at the heart of data for action is ownership from governments and engagement from the communities for better planning and adaptation in the future. And I think this came through, the issue of it being grounded in the local reality was consistent through all of the panels. Another key message was around the funding that is needed to enable action at scale. It's a matter of mobilizing investors, and it's also essential that climate adaptation funding, including the new fund for loss and damage, can be used to support action on climate mobility. And all of this needs to be anchored, recognizing the benefits for all of effective climate change adaptation and well-managed migration. The importance of elevating the role of migration as an opportunity. And I think this is one of the key messages our DG gave in her opening, and her really firm belief that migration is an opportunity it's a global opportunity that works for all countries, but most importantly, for the migrants themselves, and in a way that upholds their dignity and rights. Now, in terms of the takeaway around this, is that despite the 2030 Agenda and the Global Compact on Migration, which reflect this reality, and despite all the evidence that we have, we know that there is a negative, a toxic and political narrative that often follows migration. But what we have shown over the past 2 days, that this is a false narrative, but not only that it's false, but that solutions are forward-looking, solutions are for the benefit of mankind, and that there is global commitment around not just the action, but at the scale needed to address the issue. Now, for all of this to come together, we need to include key stakeholders in a meaningful way. We heard this in the private sector panel, we heard this in the youth panel, and something that was reiterated was co-designing, co-creating, demystifying, engaging everyone right from the beginning. And I'm really struck by how our youth advocates spoke about this. Obviously, we're always so impressed by their energy and determination despite the obstacles. And let's not underestimate what these obstacles are. Addressing violations of human rights, addressing issues of vulnerability. But at the same time, young people remain open to find and take advantage of opportunities that exist. And we all should, and we should support them in this. And I've taken note of the solutions put on the table, from better policy, stronger regional cooperation, more nuanced data. I'm certainly leaving here more personally committed to empowering and supporting meaningful inclusion of youth and other key groups in IOM's action and in my role as the Deputy Director General for Operations. So I'm going to reiterate the message our DG emphasized yesterday, that IOM is fully committed to driving change and acting as a catalyst for action on climate mobility. And now, to show that I'm not just up here speaking about it, but that we are really galvanized behind it, we've set out how we see the way forward in our new publication, Thinking About Tomorrow, Acting Today, the Future of Climate Mobility. You can access this using the QR code on the slide. We have some flyers and some table near the door I'm supposed to point to. And there's also a QR code outside the room. And in this paper, very similar to the dialogue that we've had over the past 2 days, we've looked at climate mobility through a futures lens and the opportunity that this presents. We've drawn on many years of our work on climate change and migration and our extensive partnership. So it's really, really reassuring that many of the messages over the past 2 days we have re-echoed in our paper. And the objective of this paper is to galvanize and spur action on climate mobility. And at the heart of the paper, that's a cue to change the slide I see. At the heart of the paper is a roadmap for comprehensive action on climate mobility. And it says here that you can see, but I know you can't see because it's really, really small. But just to walk you through really quickly, it's organized around a three-pronged approach for people who have no choice but to move, approaches to enable people to stay in their place of origin, and opportunities for people who want to move. And it gives very concrete actions based on this three-pronged approach, and it offers examples of where these solutions have been successfully implemented. And we hope that these ideas and examples will be replicated and scaled up by all of you in the roles that you have. And certainly as IOM, we commit to be your partner in this. And we will be taking, and we count on all of you in your role in how you will engage in COP to also take forward the outcomes of the discussions and as informed by our paper in your own roles at COP, and particularly for the member states, because you're the parties that negotiate at the COP. And so I thank everyone, speakers, moderators, participants, performers, everybody who's been managing the sound, the lighting, your name tags. This has been a whole community effort. And for your ideas, for the inspiration and the positive energy that we have collectively generated over the past 2 days. Please take this back to your capitals, take this back to your teams, keep it with you and carry it through your day-to-day work. And so with that, it's my singular pleasure and honor to hand over to DG Amy Pope for her closing remarks. And for all of IOM, she's our new DG. For many of you, she obviously as the head of the organization and leader on the issue of climate mobility and climate change. But for me, I'm the only one in the room that has had the honor of working with her for 2 years as my sister, DDG. And I could not be more inspired or more excited about the journey that we have ahead, supported by the positive energy of the participants over the past 2 days, and the real drive that you have given for this dialogue. And so with that, I say thank you. Hand over to, drum roll.
We have real drums. Oh, how exciting this is, right? I mean, I'm thrilled to be up here to say thank you, first and foremost. Thank you, of course, to our incredible Deputy Director for Operations, Ugochi Daniels. Let's give it up for Ugochi. To our extraordinary team at IOM, and especially those who put together this conference. I think when I told them my vision for what the international dialogue for migration could look like, they were skeptical, then terrified when they realized what I meant. But they have come through and they have created real energy, a real sense of community, and really a true opportunity for dialogue. So I want to say thank you to each of them who has made this possible. To our civil society actors, you all are critical to the work we do. If we're going to create a community, to create an ecosystem that delivers on real change, it cannot be without civil society at our side. So thank you for being part of today's actions and engagement. To our young people, yes, call them out. To our young people for their dancing, for their ideas, for their engagement, for their persistence, for their idealism, but also their creativity and their new ways of looking at issues. We are grateful for you. To our private sector partners who realize why better managed migration is a good idea for them and not just for those of us who are in the international or humanitarian sector. And of course, to our member states who, without all of you here, we would not be having such a dialogue. I also want to say thank you to the artists, to Alessandro Crisani, whose incredible artwork you all could see out there, to Julia Sarr, whose voice created for us emotions that transcend any policy dialogue, to IUM for their incredible, all I said is I want drums. We got drums. We got more than one kind of drum. We got several drums. And of course, for our extraordinary MC, who herself, as a woman who came from Afghanistan, who has lived the life we're talking about, has brought just incredible energy. She is an extraordinary person in her own right. I want you all to know she recently won an Emmy. Neloufar Hedayat, thank you for your incredible leadership over the last couple of days.
Thank you.
And most critically, to the migrants. Whether they're we, migrants sharing their experiences today here from the floor or as part of panels, migrants who continue to advocate in the communities where you come from, migrants who then become civil servants in your governments or community service activists or young people who are activists or artists who are activists. It is for the migrants that we do this work. It is for our communities and we who are migrants who do this work. And we are grateful for those of you who came today to share your experience and share your stories and really push us all to act. To move at the pace and the scale we know is required, it's going to require all of us to be working together, right? We know that. And we need every single part of the community. We need the artists so that we get beyond the rhetoric and we get beyond the words on the page and we feel called to act. We need to be able to have the data so that our actions are informed by evidence and not informed by anecdote or politics or the story you heard from the somebody. We need to have young people at the table, not just bringing energy and dancing, which we love that too, but bringing ideas and empowered to participate in the designing and framing of the policies. We need the private sector. We know we do, because not only the private sector brings innovation and has ways of working that we have not necessarily mastered, but the private sector brings jobs. And that's where many of these things come together. We need civil service, civil society to continue to advocate and to make sure we're leaving no one behind, and to continue to press us to make sure we are our best selves. We need our member states, because without you, we don't have the resources, the laws, the policies, the drive in order to tackle the issue of climate impact on human mobility. And I can tell you that we at IOM, we need all of you, because we at IOM, we will bring our people. We will go into the toughest places in the world, the most challenging situations that people are facing. We will bring our ideas, our engagement, our sheer determination, and our heart. So, as we close these 2 days of the International Dialogue on Migration, let's do it. Let's bring all our efforts together to create solutions for people on the move, for people who need to move, and for people who want to stay. And as we look at this incredible challenge that is in front of us, the challenge of the impact of climate change on human mobility, I'm confident that the only way we do it, but the way that we can do it, is by working together. And when we do that, we not only manage the challenges that are in front of us, but I'm persuaded that we can bring out tremendous opportunities that are truly transformational for millions of people more. So thank you all for being part of this work with us. We're so glad that you're here today, and we look forward to the work to come. All right, you are free to go.